Hello and good morning, everybody. Today I want to talk about the Tailwind color scale and how we are actually able to maybe build this in a graph. So the idea is we're going to check out the Tailwind colors and we're going to try to get a color scale that's very close to what Tailwind offers us. There will be some interesting challenges, I can already tell you. I didn't do a lot of research beforehand, so it's going to be a process of us just going through that. And yeah, then let's see where we are actually able to get to today. I think we are able to get at least like the fixed 500 scale working. Maybe partially. Let's see. So let's focus on that output kind of. And yeah, I think then like what would be interesting is kind of like compare like the Tailwind output with our output. Um, but I already know that like there will be a few things. But let me share my screen and let's look at the Tailwind colors that we get an overview of that. So share my screen, share the number one screen, not Zoom, but this. Okay, so this looks good. Perfect. Okay, 1 second. Early morning dry road. So the Tailwind color scale, it's a scale that goes from 50, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 to 900, 950. So the last steps are kind of like the granular steps on the scale here. And we have a lot of colors. The only thing I actually made yesterday is I put all the 500s into one JSON file that we can use. So in Studio, we currently have a base where I just created that OKLCH base colors that are there at the moment in Tailwind. So that's all I've done so far for that topic. But let's go back to the Tailwind colors. Oops, that's the wrong one. That's the right one. So how they are storing it in Tailwind 4 is kind of they're using now CSS, which I love actually, and they're using OKLCH, which is also very good, kind of like because it also supports extended color spaces. So OKLCH, as you can see here, we are having our red 50 to red 950. And if you just look at the values kind of, so we are starting out at 97 and we're ending somewhere around 25% here, 26%, so 98 starting point, 98 to 27. So this is kind of like consistent where it is mostly, where it's close to. That's actually in 30. That's interesting for cyan, that it's quite, that they pulled it up a bit. And that's 25 again for indigo. So you can see in the first value, kind of like as it's our luminosity, shows off kind of the lightness of the steps. Kind of other than that, seems like a good distribution. Some of them have bigger steps, some smaller steps, kind of like. The next one is our chroma, OKLCH, just to keep in mind, kind of like, is a different color model that actually looks more like this, right? So it's not a uniform color space. And that's why the values are maybe tricky to understand at first, kind of like how they work. The max chroma is around 0.37, kind of like. So that's the max chroma we should see here in our Tailwind colors. If we look at somewhere in the greens, kind of green goes up to a chroma of 219, and maybe lime goes a bit higher, 233. Okay, so these are quite high ones. Do we have something that is actually above 245 here? Yeah, 281 in violet. So violet is actually boosting up high in the scale, 288 to 95 in fuchsia. So there we actually like a boosting the saturation quite strongly. Yeah, as you can see, slate, for example, is like all in the like 1 digit kind of saturations in the percentage. So the interesting part that I've yesterday seen when I've shortly looked at it is actually like the hue rotation. So the last segment of our OKLCH is our hue, right? And here in the red, it's still okay, it's 17 to 26. But orange is like crazy, right? We're going from a 73 to a 36. Same for amber, from 95 to 45. From yellow, also 102 to 53. So I don't know if we managed to get to that segment of the colors, because that's got to be a tricky one to really like look at. But let's start out with the basics, kind of like of where we are and what we need to do, kind of. So we also, no, let's first look at some other examples because there's one tool I found which I really, really like, and that is actually UIcolors.app. Um, it's a cool helper that actually lets you generate scales for Tailwind, and it actually has a really nice representation at the bottom here. I really like that visualization. You can actually change that. I only want to see my primary, secondary, or my tertiary color. So all of these work very well. I don't think these will be accessible on the gradient, but that's another topic. And yeah, that actually looks good. One thing they actually offer, which I found now, is if we look at all the scales, show all, you can see that like our primary here is once on the 300 because we selected a very bright green, then on 700 for the purple, and then on 500 for the blue. Kind of like this is quite interesting. This actually shows us a bit of like how color scales work. I found that other generator here. Was it this one? This one here. This one works on this fixed 500 step kind of like, and I just for testing always put like in a very bright color to see what happens or a very dark color. And yeah, interestingly on the dark, it still has some granularity here, but like there's nothing here. And if I go to light, kind of like, yeah, you have no granularity anymore. That is expected kind of on the extremes, but that also means it has an impact on just your default colors, right? Because maybe your brand color is somewhere as a kind of like subtle marigold somewhere, right? And suddenly you don't have the granularity in the light steps anymore for contrast, kind of like which you would have to have in darks. Darks are growing very rapidly here, kind of like. So that's something to keep in mind. They also actually offer that one here. So if we go to the settings, they actually have like fixed input. That's unfortunately a paid subscription. But yeah, you would be able to set a fixed 500 input. I prefer it that way, but that also means that your brand button is not your brand button. So if we look at the example on the bottom, my gradient button doesn't look like the one. Actually, my solid button is on 500. It's not on 300, which is my brand color. So that's something to keep in mind, right? It's not representing actually where it needs to be. That would need probably more rewriting in the Tailwind things. Also, heads up, I'm not a Tailwind expert at all. I've never used Tailwind so far, kind of like, so I'm happy for every feedback I get on that topic. Okay, so cool settings that they have here. Use Tailwind CSS characteristics, mimic the characteristics of the original Tailwind CSS color scale. We decide what shade number your input color gets based on the lightness. That's an awesome logic. I love it, kind of like. But the downside, your primary button is not on your there, kind of. The fixed 500, and then they also have one on APCA contrast. One tool I really love from their side is actually, where was it? The contrast grid here. And let me just show this. I love this contrast grid. It's actually a really nice representation of like where the contrasts lie. So that's really cool feature they have in their tool. But let's start out. How do we get this in our design system and how do we make this sync between design and code, right? So that's the important part we want to achieve. And we got to start out in the graph engine as always. You know, graph engine is one of my babies and we are now in studio space. I already have my Tailwind V4 project that I've created. There is actually a CSS file tokens file I've created kind of with GPT that covers a few of the standard things kind of like, and we're gonna override that at the end. I just want to have like a baseline to see actually what is there since I'm getting familiar with Tailwind myself. So what we actually want to create from our base currently holds our global, we could actually rename that. Let's just do that it makes sense. And we don't have two different names. Let's change our global to our base. And that's done. Perfect. 22 tokens updated. So we have our base color red to neutral. So all of them are there. What I'm trying to achieve is get a scale that is very, very close to what Tailwind offers at the moment. So we have a few things that we want to do, but if let's just create a graph and I'm just gonna walk you through kind of like, so let's call this our global slash colors and creates scales based on the base dot colors, base colors create. Perfect. Okay, so we start with one output of that we have here, kind of like, and nothing else at the moment on that set. What we actually want to have is like we want to iterate over these colors that we have here in the list. So the first thing we're going to do here is if we, let me just reload once, kind of like, think I crashed the UI by adding something. Yeah, now it works. The first thing we want to do is actually we want to get our base colors in. So this is now loading an external set, which is our base colors. Let me also zoom in a bit. I hope that should be big enough, kind of, and let's hide the sidebar that we have some more screen real estate. And we can also collapse this one here, and we're not going to need that one. So this should be a fairly straightforward view of the graph. Okay, we're going to use these base colors, and for each of these colors, we're going to do an action of creating a scale and so on. So one thing I'm already putting here as a generic kind of like as a const. Should we have it here or should we have it in somewhere else? Kind of like, let me save this for a second and actually go here to my base colors and let's do this in the scale. Doesn't make sense to mix it up too much. Interesting. Okay, that one should be fixed. Yeah. So, gone if I reload? No. Okay. Good. So, what we want to do is for each color, we actually want to create a scale. I'm also putting one constant here with a number. That is going to be our steps. We know Tailwind has kind of like 11 steps. I just pressed V. V actually like value shows you the values. You have also the option to go to your settings and show the inline values. I don't know why this is currently breaking, but yeah. So if we show our values here and our types, we know like what can connect to what. So the next thing we need is an array map. That's a very important note for the future also, just for you to keep in mind. The array map is kind of do an action for each item in a list. So what we want to do is for each of the tokens that we have here in this token set, we want to do something. We want to create a scale for each of the items kind of. So what we're going to connect is here. We have a tokens array and that's an any array. We can connect these two. Then it's actually typed now to token array kind of. And now we can actually go into that subgraph. In that subgraph now, I can actually see the last token that is available. For that, we now actually want to do some things. The first thing we want to do is actually destruct that token. What this means is actually it gives us all the properties that are inside this token. Since a token can be a very complex JSON object, we need to destruct it and to get to the values that are there. At the moment in the DTCG spec, tokens are stored as strings. This means this is currently a string with OKLCH. What we now need to do, since Studio under the hood is working with a color object, it's using color.js under the hood, which is a color library. And we're now going to add color, like one node that actually converts that string of a color. So this is just a string into the right format. So it actually converts that OKLCH. It visualizes it as a hex value here, even though we should probably change that. It is an OKLCH format, so we probably need to change what actually like the visualization here is and not always show hex values. But sometimes it can actually break the UI. Okay, so what I have now is I have my token, I have my color. So this is now my base color for my scale, as we said. The next thing we need is actually our steps. So we're just gonna get these steps in. If I select the input of a graph, I'm able to create a new input for that array. And that's a bit of a chicken egg problem. So you always need to do that in the child, kind of like. And now we're actually gonna feed in our 11 steps from the outside. And now we have our 11 steps. The next step is we want to create 11 steps on our scale. And for each step, we want to create a color token, which means we're gonna go in here in our series, and there's a node that's called linear space. What linear space does, it actually divides between the start and the stop by the length. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect our steps to the lengths of the array. By that, it now divided one kind of into 11 steps. This is an array, right? Arrays start with 0, and that's why there's 10 at the end. But you can see it started with 0 and 1. If I would change this to 10, you would see I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's there, but we're going to go with that. I'm going to explain in a second why I want this one for the scaling factor. So that's all fine. Okay, cool. So now we can actually run an array on all these steps because we're going to create 11 steps. Second. So again, we're going to go to our array map. The array map, let us now take in these numbers. So now it's a typed number array. And I actually want that base color in. So we're going to add a new input on that sub graph, which is our base. It's a color. And we're going to add that input. If we go back up, we have this array map, right? So this is kind of like what we currently have. And now we're going to connect these. They are unfortunately crossing, which I never like, but it's okay. So we have our base, we have our steps that we need to create. So the easiest approach we could do is now just put the luminosity there and create the rest of the scale like that. So let's just build the easiest way for now, kind of like, which means what we are going to do is we're going to stick with the same hue, we're going to stick with the same saturation, we're only going to change the lightness, and for now we're only going to change that value between 0 and 1, kind of like. So if we go to color, we can actually deconstruct our color object. And then we're also going to make a new object. So we have 3 channels here. We have our A for L, C, H. So luminosity, chroma, and hue. We can connect our chroma already. We said we're not going to change that. And we can connect our hue. These two are there. We also need to connect our space. Otherwise, we will end up in RGB space. And the last thing we want to do is actually now we're going to drag in our value, which we're going to put on our luminosity. So that actually works fine. And now for that, we're going to create a token. So we now have a color which is white. The last step on our number array was 1. So that's the brightest color that is there. We now need to create a design token. So that's the important one. And the one thing, as I said before, this is a string. So we need to convert the color back to a string. So we're going to take our color to a string node, which takes in the color. We are going to output it in OKLCH. That's fine. As you can see, there's like tons of color spaces supported here. And let's put this to the value. And now the interesting part is the name. I'm not going to go with the 50 now. We're going to keep it very simple for now. We're just going to do a numeric scale, which will not cover the starting 50 and the end 50. But we'll cover that in a later step. We're going to take our index, which already is 111, and we're going to multiply 100. So we get like this nearly the same scale, but just like different. And now we can actually connect that token to the output. So to go over it again, what we are doing is for the name, we're only taking that index, which is like iterating through it, +1 kind of. The numeric scale already does a +1. And multiply it by 100 to get a numeric scale of 100, kind of like, also 100 to 1100. For the color, we are destructing the color into the separate channels of a color. So in hex, this would be RGB, right? RGB. In OKLCH, it's like luminosity, chroma, hue that we are talking to. And then we're creating a new color from that, like dissected color on that specific space. And then we're converting that to a string into a design token, creating that. So if we go to the parent graph now, if we execute this graph once, we already have our 100. to 1100 in a scale. Now, what we need to do here is we need to group this into another token, right? By the name of that token, actually. So currently this is our base color neutral. We should actually do something on the outside graph to fix this, because we actually want to ungroup. We will extend this set in the future for other base values. So what we want to do is we take that token set and we just want to strip away the base.color from it and only have red sky. Okay, that's perfect. That's actually what we want to work with. So now we just have our neutral name here, and we want to group this here by the name. So I'm taking that name, connecting it here, and taking the tokens in. And as you can see here, I start out with like 100 to 1100. Now we have our neutral 100 to 1100. This gives me my full scale of tokens. That one we can now output of that graph. If you now go to the parent graph and execute this once, you can see I got a token array of arrays. So there's two brackets, which means there's an array of arrays. They should actually be nested. That's something we can actually like tackle. And this shows me that. So there is one node that we need now, which is actually in the array, which is flattening it. We need to flatten down these arrays, kind of like, because at the moment we have one array of red colors, one of neutral, one of blue, one of green. Each of them a separate array of tokens, but we need one big array. So by flattening that, I get my big array of tokens for each color of a scale now. One last step I want to do is I want to also group them again into a token group that is called my colors. This could be your base colors, right? Again, I would stick with this to not get any confusion. And then the last step here that we need to convert this is like we are now having an array. We need to convert that array to a token set and connect it. Save that full graph once. Go to the table view, and we have a scale. It's not the Tailwind scale at the moment, right? But it's a scale. So we have our OKLCH, kind of like colors from a very dark to a very bright color. Interesting, right? Even if we have a luma of 100% and like it's not white because the saturation is there. That's something that's very interesting to OKLCH, how it interprets the colors. So, and we have no hue rotation. As you can see, the hue stays always the same, kind of like we are only changing our lightness. Let's work on the chroma first, okay? That we get like a nice chroma distribution and we don't get these super saturated ends. Or should we work on the lightness first? Now let's go left to right. Let's work on the lightness first. To get closer to what is there at the moment in the scale, I actually want to do a curve interpolation. So if we go to the graph, let me just reload this once, kind of. That the interface is working right. Okay. We actually want to add a new constant here. And this constant is going to be used for our lightness information. Let me zoom out once, otherwise it's like this interface is way too big for me. I hope that works for everybody. So we're going to set a float curve. And that float curve is going to be what we use for our lightness. So we're actually going to start out quite high and we're going to go down here. So let's look back at the Tailwind scale that we had. Colors. So they start somewhere out at 89, 87. So I'm going to put it to 98. So we're going to put it to 98 and they stop somewhere 26, 28, 27, 26, 27, 28, quite high at 28. Oh, there's actually a 13 on gray. That's interesting. Okay, don't know if I can tackle these here yet, but we can in the future. So let's stick with the colors for now, and then we can actually like check the neutrals. It's interesting that on colors they stay very tinted. If we look at the scale, does it actually like visualize quite well here? Yeah. So you can see these are way darker than these here. These are all saturated colors, even in the darks. And this is kind of like really pitch black, kind of, well, not pitch black, this is actually quite dark. They still have like 15% of luminosity, so it's like still there. What we could do is like if the saturation of a color is below a certain point, we could actually do this change to say like, hey, okay, in this ones we actually need to change kind of like our luma in that thing. But let's first do the default curve, which means we are going to put this to 98 and this one to, I think, 28 also. And then let's draw a curve. How we imagine this kind of like distributing through space. This could also be straight line, right? We're just going to do that. What we're here going to do, I'm also going to show a window, which is my node settings. I'm going to pop this in here on the bottom. So you can drag in different windows. We also visualize the values again. And let's name this one here. This is going to be our create scale per base color, per color. Okay. Or is this kind of like, yeah, that's there, kind of like. And now we're going to go inside here. And oh, my headset just turned up. Off. Interesting. Which is weird. Yeah, since nobody's around, I'll leave it on. And then we're gonna take the linear space, kind of like we know that one. And we're gonna add a new one here, which is our lightness curve. That's gonna be off-part float curve. Perfect. And that one we're gonna pipe in now from the outside. We need to connect that lightness curve. Let's go here. Let's also name this array map. That makes more sense. This is actually creating all steps of the scale. We're creating steps of the scale. And in here we need to do the same, kind of. We need to pipe that through. So let's have also lightness curve here as a float curve. And this is now connected. Awesome. Okay. Let's put that lightness curve in. Can get a bit messy now with lines. So I sometimes just double clicking adds a pass-through node, which makes it a bit nicer to just like have the lines not cross all the time. I don't know, some OCD issue probably. So in here we now have a lightness curve. So what does this mean for our color interpolation? Before we only had the colors kind of like from the value, which didn't make too much sense. What we now want to do is actually sample on that curve. This means we're gonna be able to add from our curve sections their sample float curve into that thing. Now the linear space comes in. A curve is always sampled between 0 and 1. That's why I created that linear space at the beginning. So we want to sample on that curve, and we want to sample that curve that we gave it. So as you can see, my last sample is actually 28.06 or something, kind of like. And that's actually what we're going to use now for our kind of luminosity. So we can map that to the luminosity of that color. And since this is now done, we can save once, switch over to the table view, and you can see now it actually starts at a light color and ends at a dark color. And if we go to one of the neutral colors, you can see the saturation here is gone. So yeah, we can fix that too, saturation curve. Since we are currently only working with 500 values, this is a easier fix, let's say like this. If we would sample the values on specific steps, kind of like it would be different. Let's just do a sample curve here. We're not gonna create that curve somewhere else. We only need it here, kind of like, and I'm gonna zoom out a bit here, and I'm gonna make that curve that it actually goes to the top on one, kind of like, and it also doesn't go fully to the bottom, especially not in the darks, kind of like, for the sampling. So something like this, then we can actually like drag down these handles a bit, that we're not going oversaturated. We know that our 500 is somewhere in the middle, kind of like of that curve. So by that, we know, okay, we need to desaturate at the beginning and we need to desaturate at the end, kind of. So we want our full saturation there. One thing that now comes into play is we're going to move that a bit over. we're going to work on our chroma. But we don't want to peak chroma. We actually want to stick to the chroma that is on the input color. So we're going to do the same thing we did here with sampling this curve on that curve. So I don't know, let's put this down here and let's put that value down here, that segment here, and we're actually going to sample that curve on here. And now we need to map that. So what I want to have here is actually a node that's called a range map. Range mapping. What the range map node does is it takes an input value that is on a scale. So here the scale would be 0 to 1. We actually need that one. That is actually what that number is kind of like. And then we're going to map it to an output value, which is also between 0 and 1. But our max output should be the max chroma that we get from that color. So we actually want to get our chroma, and that is going to be our max output height. Kind of like 0. Interesting. What color is it's neutral? Yeah, okay. So the input value is now this one. And that's actually everything I need kind of like for the sampling. And now let's put that one to our chroma here. So we already have the spider web of things, as you can see. Sometimes it gets a bit messy. But now we actually have our range map, which means we are not peaking saturation above, and we're using that saturation curve for the sampling. So if we save that again, go to our table view, we should now actually start off with a way less saturated color. Why is it still so high here? Oh no, it's 1 point, yeah. So we actually should be able to even like pull it down a bit more kind of on the saturation and change that curve. But other than that, it looks quite nice. So let's just really put it to 0 here. Kind of, let's say, there somewhere, kind of. And we also have to keep in mind we are sampling here on 0 to 1 of the curve. So this actually like makes sense at 98. This also makes sense. Okay, so let's check that. Cool. Okay, perfect. Well, quite a desaturated color. So let's just compare it once to Tailwind colors again, kind of how we're looking like. Yeah, I think we're getting there, kind of like. So let's just, I mean, like not considering the U rotation, but let's just pin this one here for a second, that we have the colors up. And switch over to our graph again. Oh, come on, arc. Let me switch. So we're going from a very bright one. So we are going quite strongly saturated on the curve here. And then peaking where this is a lot flatter at the tops, kind of. Which means we would need to adjust our lightness curve. So what we're going to do is, let me just pull that on the bottom here. It's not that obvious. We're going to go to our lightness curve now. And we're going to adjust these segments. So what we're doing here, one of the issues is we're going way too strongly down here, too rapidly. So we need to flatten that out a bit more on the tops. So yeah, something more like this maybe. And let's save this once. Take a look at the table. So this is now working, but the saturation is a bit of a tricky thing here because we actually don't need to saturate that fast. So if we go back to the graph, let's take that segment here and let's not go that rapidly up. Let's actually pull it a bit over, kind of like. That's a tricky one with the saturation, that to not grow that fast. Because we want it to go up to 1, kind of like. But not that strong, right? So that the issue we have now in OKLCH is that we are growing too rapidly on that curve here. So let me just try to make it a bit bigger. Oops. So that's one of the issues. We actually still want to peak, but we don't want to grow that fast. So let me just drag this back and let's add another point. So that's a cool thing. On the float curve, you can actually add more points kind of, so we can actually like sample this now like this, that we actually have a peak and we're going slower in that aspect. Maybe it actually is more like that, more of a Gaussian bell, right? We actually like draw it like this, kind of like up and down. And we're gonna save it. And now if you look at the table, yeah, we're getting less saturated colors here. So this actually looks closer to what I see here too, right? We're going down and that. So that actually is getting closer to what we have here. Yeah, we definitely need like at the end some kind of like visualization. So I work on like some kind of like side-by-side comparison for that thing. But I feel we are actually quite well there. What we're not having is kind of like our grays are actually like fully saturated, even though they shouldn't be. But like, yeah, they don't have a top saturation. So it works out kind of like with that. What we don't have is that they actually turn pitch black. But since they're desaturated, they are actually quite dark. So it works quite well. Um, I actually want to show you now like how this color breaks, right? So that's also, or why it is important to have like a repeatable logic kind of like this, because we can get like this everywhere. So let me just expand everything and let's just add a base color to our logic kind of like, and we're gonna add like a base color. Let me just think something through. And I don't know if this will work or not, because I think we're just creating it in that space. But yeah, base color, subtle, or like very light. Let's make it Pascal case because I got told it's not that good. So, and we're gonna take a hex value because I actually want to test something. So we're gonna take like this very bright red as a base color, kind of. If we now go to our colors, to our table, kind of like, we should somewhere have a very light color, which is fun. It doesn't work at all in color rotation. Amazing. Okay. I can tell you why this happens. If maybe like, if you know it, put it in the comments before maybe now. If you have a clue. Um, I think I know why this happens. Um, but yeah, um, would be interested if somebody else immediately like can tell what happened here. Okay, let's jump into a graph. Ooh, what happened here? Some interface scaling issue. Okay, let's jump into a graph. So we are actually, oh, didn't I save that one? Okay. Interesting. Why are you not showing me the latest results? Now it works. Okay. Was just some loading issue. So what happens here now is we get a color in, we're destructing it when we're working with it. The problem is, the good thing is we're actually on the last one. We are actually on sRGB. So to stay persistent in OKLCH, we need to convert the color first here. So we can actually have a convert color here. It's quite easy. So we're going to take in that color. We're always going to convert that to OKLCH. Where's our OKLCH? And then use it again. Easy fix, hopefully. Let's go back to our table. Where is our very light? Suddenly it works, kind of like it goes very desaturated, but yeah. So the cool thing is we're still keeping persistency of our scale, kind of like, because we are hard sampling. The bad thing is we are not having our input color present in that scale at the moment. So it doesn't matter what step you gave, probably it's not one of the ones that is actually visualized here, kind of like it's something else. It's a base color. We can actually like add it in the graph. So let's go back to the graph and let's just boom. Oh, in here, kind of like, oh no, sorry, colors per scale. Yeah, so we have this is our base color. What we could actually do is create a token that we could add to this array, kind of like. So we're gonna do it with an array inject item, and we actually want to add this one token, but I'm gonna create a new token that's just having the name base, because otherwise it's gonna be like an overlap of token names, right? That we have two times the same token. So we're gonna create a design token that actually has the same name. So what we can do again is like double click here, that we have one edge that we're going for. This is always going to be a color type. I could connect type to type here, and I can actually connect the value also, because that's going to be the same value. Yeah, crossing lines again. We actually want to have that item injected here, kind of like, and that into that array. And we're going to add it at the end, which means -1. That's at the last step, kind of like of the array, kind of like. So we now have our very light. Good point. I don't need that name. So let's just remove that one and reconnect it, kind of. And we're going to name that our base. That's what I actually said. The other thing didn't make sense. So we have our base, which is now kind of like this value. We're going to put that in the array. And that should actually work. Let's just make some space and sort it properly. Oops, oops. Okay, looks a bit nicer, a bit cleaner. Let's save it. Now if you go to the table view, you can see, okay, here is our base. That's actually this quite saturated red. And since this red is not on the 500, where we had actually our, or like 600, where we had our peak, kind of like here on the 600, it actually doesn't visualize. So probably 600 should be the closest one, where it's like 63 actually, 25. So yeah, actually like our base would be somewhere here, but we are already saturating here. So that's where the sampling of the curve gets interesting, of like, okay, where am I actually on that? So we need to find the closest color, and then we need to sample that again, kind of, and look into it. So that's there, but let's go to our very light and check out what we have here. And that actually looks quite awesome. Even you can see here, my base input is a hex value. Okay, cool. So the nice thing is this is already in our system. We have the scale. So if we want to have an output now, we can actually go to our configuration page, and let's just give it a try if we can actually get some outputs. Let's create a web export output, kind of like. And this is my base set that we saw before, right? And down here we actually have our color. So we have colors red with OKLCH, we have colors red, that is there. So that is working like a charm. Awesome. And that could be already used as CSS for visualization. So I can actually put this somewhere for a comparison. And the next thing I want to do is, we don't have any themes or something, but I now want to get this into my Figma. So let's just create a new Figma file. Let's name this Tailwind V4 tokens. And I now need to launch my plugin. We're gonna open the companion plugin. Let's see if it works. Don't know if it actually like already transforms OKLCH. That's gonna be a good one. Oh damn. Stop sharing. Yeah. And then HEMA Tailwind 4. Okay, that's not working. That's pretty sure because of the OKLCH. Let's just launch the regular plugin and see if this works. And let's make an empty file, settings, let's apply the Zen Garden, but we're gonna change this one. No, my API key is gone. Let me stop sharing for a second. Oh, wait, what? Let me share and show you how you can create an API key. So we're just gonna write API keys. I'm gonna delete this one here. Gonna create a new one. API. Let's call it Figma. Create. I'm gonna delete this after we synced immediately. So this is Studio. Put the API key here. Save. Choose my HEMA organization. Choose my project of Tailwind and save. And yeah, it's also breaking because of the OKLCH. That's what I imagined. Okay, so something that we can actually work on for support to have this there. Figma doesn't support OKLCH, so we need to find a way of how to support that. Let's go back to Studio and delete my Figma API key. Perfect. And let's go back to my project. Okay. So we have kind of like a core thing ready. In the next session, I would love to focus on the adjusting of the hue and then working on kind of like that you can choose between are you keeping 500 or are you staying on kind of like an arbitrary step on the scale. The next session will be a lot more steep, I would say. I hope this one wasn't too steep, but I think it gave you a bit of an insight on like how things work. I have to blur out a few things, so sorry for that, kind of like because there were some things that were I shouldn't show on stream. But other than that, I think it gave you good insight. If you want to have that graph, I'm gonna share it kind of with everybody in the current state. So I'm just gonna download that, upload it to Graph Engine standalone. In Studio, you have all these benefits of having the immediate output and everything. And yeah, we're just gonna work on that to get it there for you to work it. Cool. I hope that gave you some cool insights today. If you have any questions, drop them under the video. I'm happy to be there, kind of like if you have more intense questions, reach out on Slack and happy to hear from you. Have a nice day. Bye bye.